In a region of narrow streets and mud brick houses, where everyone knew each other by name and silence was a way of life, something happened that marked a town forever. It was not a war or a visible catastrophe. It was something small, something that could have been stopped with a single voice. But no one spoke. Stay until the end, and you will discover why this day changed everyone. It is a humble story, but one filled with truth. If you value stories that leave a lasting mark, I invite you to subscribe and walk with me. That town lived by routine. At dawn, doors opened at the same time. Bread was distributed the same way every morning, and greetings were repeated without really looking into each other's eyes. There lived Tomas, a simple man in charge of the communal storehouse. He was not a leader, nor did he seek to be one. He simply did his job, listened more than he spoke, and preferred not to get involved in other people's matters. He used to say that peace was preserved by avoiding problems, even when something did not seem entirely fair. One afternoon, as evening fell, Tomas saw something that broke that normality. In the town square, the keeper of the records accused Mateo, a young worker, of having taken more grain than allowed. Mateo did not shout or defend himself. He only lowered his head while people watched from a distance. Tomas knew the record was wrong. He himself had written it. All it took was saying so. But around him, whispers began. "Don't get involved. It's none of your business. He always brings trouble." The stares weighed more than words. No one confirmed the accusation, but no one denied it either. The official raised his voice and spoke of order, of setting an example, of consequences. Mateo tried to explain, but his voice was lost among uncomfortable sighs. Tomas felt the urge to step forward. His lips parted slightly. Then someone beside him whispered, "If you speak, tomorrow it could be your name." Tomas closed his mouth. Silence won again. That night, the punishment was decided. Mateo would lose his job and his place in the storehouse. He was not expelled with shouting, but with signed papers and serious faces. As he left, he passed in front of Tomas and looked at him for a second. There was no anger. There was disappointment. That look stayed lodged like a thorn. The town returned to its apparent calm, but something had changed. What seemed like a minor problem left a crack that no one yet dared to name. The days that followed seemed normal, but they were not. The storehouse kept running, though there were fewer hands. Tomas took on more tasks and more silence. Mateo no longer crossed the square. His house remained closed. Some said he had left out of shame. Others claimed that the same would happen to anyone who did not respect the rules. No one mentioned the error in the records. The truth remained there, still, waiting for a voice that never came. A week later, something similar happened. This time, it was Clara, a woman who distributed water on the outskirts of the town. She was accused of arriving late and disrupting the schedule. Tomas once again knew it was not true. He himself had changed the schedule that morning. Clara tried to explain herself, but the response was the same. Eyes to the ground, crossed arms, heavy silence. Tomas felt the knot in his chest tighten. Remaining silent was no longer just about avoiding problems. It was about allowing them. That night, Tomas did not sleep. He remembered Mateo's gaze, now replaced by Clara's, tired and confused. He thought about speaking the next day, about correcting the mistake, about stopping the chain. But at dawn, the official announced new, harsher rules to prevent abuses. The town nodded in unison. No one questioned anything. Tomas understood that every silence was building something larger than they could control. The atmosphere changed. People began to watch what they said, even among friends. Conversations lowered in volume. Laughter became brief. Everyone protected their place. Tomas noticed that it was no longer about justice, but about fear. He knew that if he spoke, the error would come to light. But he also knew the cost would not be small. Silence had stopped being comfortable and had become mandatory. One afternoon, Tomas met Mateo's mother outside the storehouse. She did not ask for explanations or help. She only said, "My son left this world without understanding what he did wrong." There was no reproach, only exhaustion. Tomas felt the ground shift beneath his feet. This was no longer an administrative misunderstanding. It was a deep wound, and the most disturbing part was not what had happened, but realizing that it could have been avoided with a single word. From that day on, Tomas walked with an invisible weight. Every time he opened the storehouse, he saw the incorrect record as a silent accusation. He thought about correcting it, but it was no longer enough. The damage was done. Speaking now meant admitting that his earlier silence had allowed everything to happen. The town continued its routine, but Tomas understood something uncomfortable. Failure does not always come from what we do. Sometimes it comes from what we do not say. Soon after, an elderly man was accused of mixing up the accounts. He did not shout or argue. He simply handed over the keys and walked away slowly. Tomas knew, once again, that it was not true. This time, no one whispered. The silence was total, almost disciplined. It was then that he understood the town no longer stayed quiet, out of fear of trouble, but out of habit. Error had become the norm, and injustice an everyday landscape. That night, Tomas decided he would speak the next day. He rehearsed every word, every piece of proof. Thinking about it brought him relief, but at dawn, the official announced a general review and warned that those who disrupted order would be removed. The warning was not violent. It was calm, calculated. Tomas understood the message. It was not a direct threat. It was an invitation to silence, and the town, once again, accepted it without discussion. Tomas hesitated. If he spoke, he would lose his place, his livelihood, perhaps even his good name. If he remained silent, things he could not justify would continue to happen. He walked through the square and saw lowered faces, doors closing earlier than usual. No one seemed happy, but no one rebelled. There he understood that the real conflict was not with the official, but with his own conscience, which no longer allowed him to sleep in peace. That afternoon, while organizing the storehouse, Tomas found the original record. It was intact, clear, without doubt. The truth was still waiting. At that moment, he heard bells. They were not for celebration. The town was gathering urgently. Someone had been accused once again, and this time, the damage seemed irreversible. Tomas held the paper in his hands. He knew that after that moment, nothing could ever go back. In the square, the townspeople surrounded Julian, a young man in charge of transporting food. He was accused of altering deliveries and causing shortages. Julian tried to speak, but no one listened. The official displayed incomplete papers, similar to the previous ones. Tomas knew instantly that the same mistake was being repeated. This time, it was not just a job at stake. If Julian fell, many families would be left without their livelihood. The official ordered that Julian be removed immediately and taken out of the town to avoid conflicts. No one shouted, no one protested. Tomas felt the air grow heavy. He pulled out the correct record and took a step forward. But then he saw the neighbors, even friends, silently shaking their heads. It was not a plea. It was a wordless warning. Tomas stopped. He lowered the paper. Silence prevailed once again. Julian was taken away that very afternoon. Days later, transportation came to a halt. Food began to run short. People started to go hungry, but there was no one left to blame. The official disappeared from the town without a trace. Tomas understood that silence had not only allowed injustice, it had also destroyed the balance of everyone's lives. What had been avoided for the sake of comfort returned multiplied as consequence. One morning, Tomas found Julian's wife sitting in front of her house. She did not accuse him. She only said, "If someone had spoken, this would not have happened. Thomas could not reply. For the first time, he understood that staying silent had not protected him. It had made him part of the harm. The entire town began to look at itself differently. There were no more accusations, only shared guilt. Silence had stopped being a refuge and had become a sentence. As the days passed, the town lost its rhythm. Doors took longer to open, conversations were brief. No one trusted anyone. Thomas kept working, but he was no longer the same. Every record, every entry reminded him of what he had not said when there was still time. He understood that silence had not been neutral. It had been a decision. And every decision, sooner or later, demands its price. Over time, the town began to understand what had happened. There was no single culprit to point to. Every averted gaze, every closed mouth had built the outcome. Thomas looked at the empty square and remembered the day when everything could have been stopped. It was not evil that destroyed the town, but the accumulation of small refusals to speak the truth when it was still easy to do so. One afternoon, Thomas gathered some neighbors and showed them the correct records. No one was surprised. Many already knew. Others had sensed it. The truth brought no relief. It arrived too late. Julian did not return. Matteo did not either. The damage had already been sown. They understood that there are truths which, when silenced for too long, lose their power to repair and serve only to teach through pain. Months later, Thomas left the storehouse, not as punishment, but by choice. He understood that he could not remain in a place where his silence had carried weight. He began traveling to nearby villages, helping where he could, speaking up when something was not right, even if it made people uncomfortable. He was not seeking forgiveness. He was seeking not to repeat the same omission. Speaking in time became his new form of responsibility. The town never fully regained its former calm. It learned, but at a high cost. From then on, when something seemed wrong, someone dared to speak, even if their voice trembled. They did not always manage to change the outcome, but they no longer stayed silent out of habit. The memory of that wordless day remained as a quiet warning that everyone understood without the need for explanation. This is how the day when no one spoke is remembered, not as a sudden tragedy, but as a chain of accumulated silences. Because not all harm is born from cruelty. Some is born from the fear of causing discomfort. And this is the lesson that was etched into that place. When the truth is silenced to preserve calm, what is lost is not the conflict, it is the conscience.